Sergey Lavrov continues his African tour and apparently cannot hold a press conference without mentioning Ukraine. This time, Russia's foreign minister traveled to Mozambique. While speaking about terrorism and conflicts across Africa, he suddenly claimed that Ukrainian mercenaries had recently become actively involved in terrorist attacks on the continent. Naturally, Lavrov provided no evidence, but this has become a familiar Russian diplomatic routine. Wherever there is a war, a crisis, or a terrorist threat, Ukraine eventually appears, at least in Lavrov's speeches.
We discussed other issues concerning the African continent, including the situation in the Sahara-Sahel region, the conflict between the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda, and other crisis hotspots. We advocate for their resolution through negotiations, alongside the suppression of terrorist threats, which, unfortunately, persist across the continent. Moreover, Ukrainian mercenaries have recently begun to be actively involved in these terrorist attacks.
Lavrov also said Moscow no longer believes the West when it speaks about negotiations. Perhaps the Kremlin is still mourning the imaginary spirit of anchorage, a spirit that never really existed in the first place.
We will no longer believe the West when it claims to desire negotiated solutions in the Ukraine conflict. That reservoir of goodwill and hope has been completely exhausted.
Putin has held another emergency meeting about Russia's fuel crisis. The Russian dictator says Ukraine is trying to damage the economy and create panic in society. But according to dictator Putin, this plan will fail because Russia's energy system supposedly has one of the strongest safety margins in the world.
Obviously, the enemy is trying to damage the economy. But most importantly, it is trying to create a nervous atmosphere in society. We understand that this task is impossible. Russia's energy system has a very high safety margin, one of the highest in the world.
That may come as a news to drivers in occupied Crimea, where petrol is more expensive than in many Russian regions, and shortages have become increasingly difficult to hide.
Let us agree that the wording should be different. Not simply ready to consider, not simply consider, but consider it and make a decision as quickly as possible. There is no need to drag this out.
The Kremlin is discussing subsidies for occupied Crimea and Sevastopol because fuel prices have risen sharply. And NATO called Russia a long-term threat. The Kremlin responded by accusing NATO of aggression. Dmitry Peskov said that simply declaring Russia an adversary was already an aggressive act.
Russia has been declared a long-term threat and an adversary. This obliges us to remain strong and confident and to continue strengthening our security and our economy. We will continue developing the country and protecting its interests. The very fact of declaring someone an adversary is, in itself, an aggressive action. NATO was originally created as an instrument of confrontation, first against the Soviet Union and later against Russia.
Ukraine could receive a U.S. license to produce Patriot air defense systems or interceptor missiles. It would be a major step for the country, but it would not solve Ukraine's air defense shortage immediately. The Patriot system is extremely complex. Producing even one missile requires engines, guidance systems, communication equipment, and many other components. Ukrainian aviation experts says around 400 companies are involved in the production of a Patriot missile.
Trump said that Ukraine would most likely receive a license to produce Patriots, but he did not explain what exactly Ukraine would be allowed to produce. If we are talking about missiles, we must understand that around 400 companies are involved in making them. They produce engines, guidance systems, communication systems, and other components. So this is a very large and complicated production chain.
And another problem, any factory producing Patriot missile in Ukraine would immediately become a priority target for Russia. That means production facilities would need to be protected, hidden, or even built underground. This would require time, money, and additional security.
We need to think about placing production in a safe location. Such factories may need to be built underground or inside protected shelters. Russia would certainly try to strike these facilities because they would help Ukraine defend its airspace.
Ukraine may be able to use existing factories and gradually expand production. The country already has experience scaling up military technologies during the war. But the most urgent problem is not the number of Patriot launchers or raiders. The problem it is the shortage of interceptor missiles. Ukraine needs those missiles now, while any domestic production would take years to reach full capacity.
Ukraine can join the group of countries helping to increase the production of these missiles. The main problem today is not only the number of launchers, radars or command posts. The most urgent problem is the shortage of missiles themselves.
So the American license could become a long-term solution and make Ukraine less dependent on foreign supplies. But until Ukrainian production begins, Kyiv will still need Patriot interceptors from the United States, Germany and other allies to protect its cities from Russian ballistic missiles. Putin has rejected the idea of a ceasefire along the current front line and is prepared to continue the war until Russia captures the whole of Donbas. According to Reuters, citing sources close to the Kremlin, Putin dismissed proposals from advisors who suggested a compromise or a freeze of the war along the existing front line. He continues to insist that full control of the Donbas remains a non-negotiable objective. Ukraine's recent strikes on Russian oil refineries, ports and fuel infrastructure have not pushed the Kremlin towards compromise. Instead, Reuters reports they have strengthened the position of those inside Moscow who are arguing for further escalation of its war.
Putin rejected the idea of a ceasefire along the current front line and criticized advisors who proposed a compromise. He insists that the full capture of Donbas remains his unconditional goal. Russia could intensify its offensive in the coming months. Ukrainian strikes on oil refineries, ports and fuel infrastructure have not pushed Moscow towards negotiations. On the contrary, they have strengthened the arguments of those calling for escalation. The Kremlin is also discussing the need to create a new security zone beyond Donbas. This sharply contradicts Donald Trump's claims that an agreement to end the war could be close.
Turkey has just hosted a NATO summit talking about the alliance's security and Ukraine's future. But at the same time, Ankara is trying to get rid of the Russian-made S-400 systems, the very systems that cost Turkey access to America's F-35 fighter jets and triggered U.S. sanctions. The Kremlin has already confirmed that it has held talks with Turkey over the fate of the systems. Turkish media say the S-400s could be resold to a Gulf country. Other reports point to South Korea. For Ankara, this is an attempt to get back into the U.S. F-35 program and have sanctions lifted. For Moscow, it's not an attractive prospect. Its most heavily marketed air defense system could end up in the hands of a third country instead of remaining with a NATO member state.
The issue of Turkey potentially selling the Russian-made S-400 air defense systems is an extremely sensitive matter. Russia has held discussions with Turkey on this issue, and those contacts will continue.
Russia is preparing for parliamentary elections, but even the word peace now comes with a price. The liberal Yabloko party has been allowed onto the ballot, yet more than 40 of its members have been barred from running and 7 are already in detention. Its campaign is built around just 43 words: peace, life without fear, and democratic Russia in Putin's system. That is enough to risk prison.
We fully understand, and our candidates understand, that voicing such demands, such a platform and such words in Russia today entails a significant, serious risk. All our candidates are consciously accepting the risk to their own freedom.
Poland's government says it will defend its decision to transfer Patriot missiles to Ukraine, despite criticism from President Karol Nawrocki. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz said supporting Ukraine directly serves Poland's national interests. He argued that providing several Patriot missiles at the request of the United States and NATO Secretary General was the right decision and one he was personally prepared to defend. Kosiniak-Kamysz also said he was proud that Poland was helping a country that has been holding back and exhausting Russia for more than 4 years.
Poland will support Ukraine and help as much as it can.
Transferring several Patriot missiles at the request of the United States and the NATO Secretary General is not something bad. On the contrary, it is a good thing. I will defend this decision, which was taken by the government, the Ministry of Defense, and by me personally. I am proud that we are helping a state that has been exhausting the Russian Federation for 4 years.
The minister confirmed that President Karol Nawrocki had been informed about the transfer, but stressed that the final decision belonged to the government. The United Nations Security Council is once again discussing a war it has still failed to stop. Ukraine has urged the Council to consider as soon as possible a draft resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Ukraine's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Volodymyr Pavlichenko, said, "The international community must put an end to the Security Council paralysis over Russia's crimes." At the same meeting, the United Nations presented new figures on civilian casualties. Preliminary data show that Russia killed at least 265 Ukrainian civilians in June, while another almost 2,000 people were injured. That is higher than the toll record in May.
This war continues to undermine international law and erode regional peace and security. Its consequences continue to inflict a devastating toll and a higher cost for all concerned, with Ukrainian civilians bearing the brunt. There are no military solutions that could bring about lasting peace.
The United Nations also stressed that Russian occupation is not only about military control, it is also the systematic persecution of everything connected to Ukraine.
Recent report on the situation of human rights in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine, including the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the city of Sevastopol, Russian authorities continue to violate international humanitarian and human rights law. The report refers to severe restrictions of freedom of expression and opinion, with occupying authorities imposing administrative fines or prison sentences on residents for criticizing them or expressing pro-Ukrainian opinions or using pro-Ukrainian symbols.
That's all for now. Thank you for watching.